This is episode 253 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, despite this being a holiday week, and happy Thanksgiving, by the way.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, Paul.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in just a second. There was a lot of news still going on, not the least of which is a very rare, perhaps unprecedented, special session of the New Mexico legislature, Thanksgiving edition. So all the turkeys got to one place in New Mexico. Just kidding.
Oh, no, only part of them. Some of them were online.
That's true. There was an online component to the legislature yet again. But just kidding to any thin-skinned folks up in San
No, we mean turkeys in the sense that Benjamin Franklin did. Practically our national bird.
Practically our national bird, yes. So how was your Thanksgiving, Wally?
It was quiet, shall we say. So Thanksgiving just consisted of my wife and I. We have a family member who is currently in a rehab facility, but that will be coming back, and he's one of those... He's in a situation where he is elderly, he has underlying conditions, and so we wanted to do everything we could to do that. And so quiet. I won't say boring, but it was subdued, the most subdued Thanksgiving in my lifetime that I can remember. So
yeah, I totally understand that, although apparently you got out and about, had some nice weather.
Oh, yeah, I got some nice weather and got to ride mountain bikes in the Bosque. So I don't know. Are we supposed to exercise? I always lose track of the rules. But anyway, we were out riding beautiful Thursday around midday and had a good time doing that. Absolutely.
Yeah, at the Gessing family, we were slightly in excess of the governor's recommendation / order, 5 people. We kind of roll that way when you have me, my wife, and 3 children. We're the 5 already there. My mother, she's assisting with homeschooling the children, so she's kind of part of our lives on a day-to-day basis. And my wife's sister was also there. Now, my wife's sister recently had COVID-19. She works in the daycare industry,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, it's an industry where, partially because of the way government funding works, she's dealing with a lot of people who may not necessarily be the most responsible when they are dealing with COVID-19, bringing sick kids, being sick themselves, coming into the daycare facility. And, it was probably just a matter of time before she wound up getting it. Thankfully, she is A-OK and was well away from being potentially contagious or anything. So
yeah, and once you've had it, no one's safer than somebody who's just had the COVID and gotten over it. So
exactly. So anyway, for everybody else out there, whatever you did on Thanksgiving, I hope you had an enjoyable time. Totally understand if people played it very safe. We would probably have maybe gone over to somebody's place and had a bigger event. It's not that, I think this is, not to get off too much on a tangent, but it's not as if those who are skeptical of the governor's orders and dictates, whether it's our governor or other states' governors, that we are totally ignorant and ignoring of the virus and its potential harms. It's just that we're adults. Thank you very much. We will certainly take advice and make decisions based on our own facts and realities. We don't go for arbitrary numbers, whether it's 5 or 6 or 7. The fact is that there are always circumstances beyond what any central government agency, government person, government planner can know or tell us.
yeah, that there is no question about that. And I came across a new word. A lot of people try, including the governor's office, frankly, try to make everything about Democrat and Republican, and I'm not sure that's the case. So, not too long ago, I was in Sedona, Arizona, a little bit of a woo-woo place, and I came across a term. It's called conspirituality, and that's where a lot of the people in Sedona, they are kind of opting out, and I don't think that that is a bastion of conservative Republican politics, but it is interesting, this kind of freedom where freedom and personal choice comes in on this thing, and it's not everywhere you would expect in terms of it just being a traditional Republican Democrat thing here in the U.S.
Yep. And, talking about Thanksgiving, obviously food is a big part of that holiday. And the food situation, we alluded to it a little bit, just talking about some of the quirks and dubious aspects of the governor's order as it pertained to grocery stores. But I think it's safe to say, and it's tough. It is tough to get New Mexico to go national in a national media context.
But we did it.
We did it.
Yes.
Thank you, Governor Lujan Grisham. Many news outlets picked up on the stories of people standing in inclement weather, cold conditions as it cooled down, and having to try to get into grocery stores or grocery stores being shut down. Breitbart is just one of many news outlets that picked up on the modern breadlines. That was my one of the turns of phrase that I and others used to kind of describe the situation in New Mexico. And yes, it's not because people can't afford the food. It's not because there's no food available. It's because the combination of the 4 rapid response tests over a few week period and the 75 people total in a very large store made it very difficult for a lot of these grocery stores to remain open and to accommodate the number of people that wanted to get in. So there were definitely issues and seems to be ongoing. I don't know exactly when or if this situation will change. I understand there was something done in the special session to address it, but when will that all take effect? I'm not quite aware of it at this point. But certainly in advance of a holiday that, pretty much Thanksgiving, you think of a couple things, getting together with the family, cooking a lot of food and turkey, and watching some football. And those 3 things. And when you put up roadblocks to going into grocery stores, you're not going to go into your local restaurant and come out. Not many restaurants cover the full turkey and all the fixing. That's a pretty steep order. You can definitely go out to eat on Thanksgiving in normal times, but they don't do the full turkey with everything. It's just not a restaurant-friendly food item.
Yeah, and I saw when people were starting to complain about the grocery store situation, the governor's spokesperson said something to the effect that these were Republican talking points. Well, Paul, I must not be a very good Republican because I came to that conclusion just on my own driving down Eubank Avenue. So there's a Walmart, there's a Sam's, and there's a Costco. And right after that went into, I had to run an errand. And on the way back, I said, this looks like there may be an unintended consequence. This does not look good. And so, I didn't need to be prompted. And so, people in towns where they have just a few grocery stores, if you shut one down, it's bad news. The limits we've talked plenty of times. When you do absolute limits on the downside, it's like if a convenience store and a Walmart superstore both have the same maximum number theoretically possible, maybe some bad things are going to happen, and it did.
Yeah, central planning does not generally work very well. It is a very ineffective mechanism, and it's been proven to be ineffective throughout this entire process. And if we have some time at the end of this podcast, we'll talk a little bit about that. But speaking of central planning, our taxpayer dollars, and this, again, the timing, and we're going to talk to Carol White of the New Mexico Restaurant Association about the mandatory paid sick leave deal at the city of Albuquerque in this week's interview podcast. But timing, and unfortunately, when it comes to film subsidies, our media here in New Mexico just doesn't have a clue, or they are so bought off or whatever by the film industry that they are unwilling to look at anything more than the press releases put out by the powers that be. But of course, kind of before we get to the legislative session itself, the biggest economic news of the week, it involved Thanksgiving, was the Netflix deal that they will be spending and expanding their footprint. They'll be spending $1 billion additionally here in New Mexico. And I have a Netflix account. I enjoy watching a lot of films and movies, and shows. Wally, do you have partake in Netflix?
Yeah, I absolutely have a Netflix account, although I have become less enamored of it lately, Paul. When Netflix first went from, I'm old enough that I remember where Netflix used to send me a DVD in the mail. For real.
Too.
I was back in the old days. Also, when they first went online, they had a fantastic selection of foreign films and some kind of avant-garde indie films. And they've gotten really away from that. And I find myself going to Amazon Prime a lot more than Netflix, with a couple of exceptions of a few shows. So, yeah, I have both of them. And I don't know. I like both of them. I don't want to get rid of them. But if I were forced to, I'd think right now maybe Netflix might be the loser in that contest.
Well, regardless, we should all be getting free Netflix accounts here in the state of New Mexico.
Yeah, because we're paying for it with our tax dollars.
We are going to be ponying up even more money for Netflix. So here are some of the broad outlines for the recently inked deal. Of course, film companies, just any of them, can come to New Mexico and get 25% of their expenses reimbursed by the state of New Mexico. This is an incredibly generous, and it is different. Once again, I will say it and say it and say it. If you got, for example, an exemption on your gross receipts tax, that is of questionable economic merit, but nobody is cutting checks to your business or your industry. In this case, the 25% is actually a check cut to your business, in this case, Hollywood filmmakers. But in New Mexico...
Wait, Paul, do they call that corporate? Is that corporate welfare?
This is the worst kind of corporate welfare. This
isn't kind of corporate welfare. This is the real thing.
This is corporate welfare on steroids. Yeah, they're in a rational and just world, the New Mexico Voices for Children and other lefty groups would be marching in the streets about this kind of thing, because it is the very definition of taking money from the taxpayers in the poorest state in the country and handing money over to some of the wealthiest millionaires and billionaires in the country. And I'm not just talking about Netflix. I'm talking about the Hollywood superstars that fly in here and fly back out in order to shoot these particular films. But in New Mexico, you get 30% if you are a qualified production facility, and that essentially involves signing some kind of 10-year long-term lease that you're going to commit to taking as much money as you possibly can.
Why wouldn't you sign that deal?
Oh, twist my arm, please. So Netflix gets off as a starting point 30% back from we, the taxpayers. But wait, there's more. The project, or Netflix, will receive an additional $17 million from the state of New Mexico in so-called LIDA incentives, with the city of Albuquerque kicking in another $7 million. So we're talking $24 million. And again, these are payments made from, in this case, the state and the city. These are directed to whatever business comes to town. And, There are some modest strings attached, but again, these are checks directly from the state and or the city, and in this case, both. $24 million dollars just right to these companies. Now, we at the Rio Grande Foundation do not like the LIDA program. Again, this is straight out of the worst kinds of corporate welfare that we dish out here in the state of New Mexico. The only thing that makes it somewhat less offensive to us at the Rio Grande Foundation is that unlike the film incentives where you get those every single year you're here, LIDA is generally a one-shot kind of operation where you spend the 24 or whatever million dollars, and that is that.
Yeah, and then the other issue that it always I'm always interested in the legal and logical gymnastics. You know, New Mexico has this thing that's called the anti-donation clause, where you can't get private businesses and private entities money, but you can. And you know, LIDA, the film subsidies, many things. It is interesting the fact that this is the industry that has most favored nation, most preferred industry in all of New Mexico. Maybe that is there one that would be better than that? I don't know. Manufacturing, you know,
No,
high tech,
there is no business like show business in New Mexico when it comes to subsidies. It's not even close. There are no other businesses that get this kind of favoritism. And as if all of that were not enough, wait, there is still more.
This is like an infomercial.
It
is. Wait,
I know it's all your money too. Billy Banks, Eat Your Heart Out, or whoever else those guys are. You know the names of the people on those infomercials. There's going to be a IRB, Industrial Revenue Bond. Now, industrial revenue bonds are another very questionable program under which the government, and I believe it'll be this case the city, but
it could be the county as well.
Yeah.
It's interesting how that
right.
They pick the right entity.
Well,
now what tax does that get us out of, Paul?
So the IRB program, and it depends on the deal. There's negotiations to come, but typically it means that some or all, generally close to all, of the property taxes will be eliminated on a long-term basis for Netflix. We don't have all the details. They're going to be worked out, but generally speaking, local governments roll over for these big companies very, very easily. IRBs tend to be very generous. Back in the day, Intel did not pay property taxes for something like the first 30 years at that facility in Rio Rancho. And then only recently they became liable for annual property tax payments. We believe that this is a 20-year, first and foremost, 20-year exemption on some level of the property taxes at the Netflix facility up there on Mesa del Sol. So, an incredible, and oh, by the way, yes, wait, there is still more. There is a film cap in New Mexico, an annual film cap. It got increased during the Lujan Grisham administration, 2019. But because Netflix is a qualified production facility, they have no cap. So literally any amount of money could be spent on Netflix every single year.
Oh, so Paul, in terms of that no cap, so what if they were to move their entire worldwide operations here and it got into the amount where we actually might even wake up to the fact that it's of questionable merit for our overall economy? Part of these 10-year deals, my understanding, you may know more than me, is that it commits government as well as the industry for a period of time on some of these long-term deals. Have you read the fine print on that yet? So I've just heard it alluded to a couple times. So,
well, I mean, it is a strict commitment theoretically for government. I don't know if there's a possibility that some conservative governor would come in and try to alter the situation. But yeah, if the state were somehow unable to make the appropriate payments to Netflix under this cap, the the Netflix would have the right to go any time they chose.
Yeah.
And that might be a tough decision for them if only part of the agreement was no longer applied to by the state or complied with by the state. But there are so many different aspects of subsidization being given to Netflix that they would really be fools to leave unless the whole situation just fell apart and somebody said, we don't want film anymore. We're going to pull back all these subsidies. Or somehow the state was on the verge of bankruptcy, which it could happen.
Yeah, that's not an impossibility given what's going on in the oil and gas industry, COVID, aggressive aggressive fiscal policy, which aggressive is code for spending lots of money and not necessarily knowing where the revenue is going to come from. So
Exactly. So it's stay tuned. We shall see. But just unbelievable government subsidies offered to Netflix, and the media does not report on this stuff. It is just they mention it, but it is always within the context. And I read the full Albuquerque Journal article. It's all within the context of this is so amazing, quoting all these government officials. This is a great opportunity. They're going to spend so much money here, this, that, and the other. And, let's just say President Trump, as one example, somebody who constantly gets called out on the carpet for fake news, making bold claims, bald-faced claims, whatever they may be. There is nothing that President Trump has said during his time in office that is more outlandish than calling this Netflix deal, a boon to the New Mexico economy, or that the way that it is so convenient for the media to cover up all of the subsidies and all the benefits they're getting, and the way that they're really fleecing the state of New Mexico. It's outrageous the way the media covers it, quite frankly.
yeah, it is, and with a few notable exceptions, and I won't jinx them by naming their names. There's not a lot of reporters that like numbers, frankly, and understand what they mean, and that could be the case. The other thing is, what is it? Scott Adams and Dilbert were needing to go to some kind of double entendres. It's like the economy of New Mexico will never be the same again after this deal, or the fiscal health of New Mexico will never be the same after this deal, implying that it's going to be better when, in fact, maybe it's not. It's just never going to be the same. It can go both directions. Or we're taking our economy to a new level, Paul. Yep. Is it at a higher level or is it a lower level net overall because of this deal? So we'll have to wait and see. But that uncapped, that seems like a huge problem.
You got it. Well, we did have a special session this week, Wally. And, there's been so many other things happening in the world these days that a special session doesn't necessarily elicit a lot of attention here at the Rio Grande Foundation, partially because this was kind of the formal opportunity for the legislature to spend some COVID CARES Act money coming from the federal government, $320 or so million that came through from Washington that needed to be officially spent, how that money was spent, etc. That is, it's an important thing, but as you might imagine, for any day-long special session, wasn't a lot in terms of substantive public policy discussions. It was just, we got to spend this money now. And we're going to play some audio. It's a little long, but and a little wonky because there's points of order and stuff. But the end, I promise you, the payoff at the end is worth the investment of the 2 minutes or so of audio that you're going to hear. So, setting the stage, last Tuesday, there for the day-long special session, there was money available, and Representative Rebecca Dow, a Republican, presented an amendment to a relief bill, one of the many spending bills, that would have provided a $600 one-time payment to frontline essential workers who make less than $15 an hour. This was not something, because this was not in the deals that had been struck between Speaker Egolf, a Democrat, the governor, Peter Wirth, the majority leader, the Senate. But this was very politically, a good thing for Republicans, putting Democrats on the spot. The Speaker didn't want to have his members have to take a vote on this measure. He said they don't need the support because they already have jobs. So Speaker Egolf is attempting to end debate on the bill, despite there being an amendment still up for debate and not having been voted on. So he essentially kind of alters the rules and interprets them in his own favor. He was called out, Speaker was called out in this particular exchange, and he did, to his credit, but he did reverse the vote on the relief bill and take up the amendment, voting again before voting on the main bill.
Mr. Speaker, could you repeat that? We cannot hear you.
Yes, pursuant to Rule 7-3, we will go back to the members who have passed. All of those who have passed and who do not vote during this will be noted as present in the journal, pursuant to Rule 7-3.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlemen, you can state a point after the roll call is closed. The clerk to call back on those who have previously passed.
My point of order is on your ruling, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlemen, you can challenge the ruling of the chair after the roll call is closed.
Representative Brown.
I vote no, and I would like to explain my vote.
Representative Brown votes no. Representative Dow.
I vote yes, and I'd like to explain myself.
Representative Dow votes yes. Representative Ezell.
Yes, and I would like to explain my vote.
Representative Ezell votes yes. Representative Harper.
Well, since we're throwing the rules out and just using them when we would like, I'll explain myself now and then vote. Mr. Speaker, you have made a mockery of this body and of the rules. You are choosing to use the rules that you want, and I'm choosing to use the rules when I want. Mr. Speaker, I'm disgusted with you and how you run this body. There was nothing wrong with going to closing remarks by Representative Dow and voting on that and voting on the bill. But you, again, are a bully and use that chair to suit your whims. I vote yes. Thank you.
Representative Harper votes yes.
So needless to say, some high drama there in Santa Fe, Wally. And Jason Harper, if you know him,
He's a laid back. He's
about as mild-mannered
Yes.
as you get
Yep.
in Santa Fe. And
He's a very serious man in terms of the issues, but yeah, from a style point of view, that is he is not a hair on fire kind of guy. No offense, Paul.
to those who do not have hair, yes, Jason, among other things, has a very nice head of hair there. But anyway, that was some of the excitement that did happen at the special session in Santa Fe. And of course, as you could probably tell, some of the folks there were remote appearances in the legislative session. It was not entirely live, and the challenges of that.
It wasn't live, but it was lively.
It was
evidently.
lively, yes.
Yes.
And having that kind of process in place, again, special session, totally one different thing. 60-day session, that's going to be a real problem if they continue, or if they make it a virtual session somehow. Moving on, Wallet Hub. Good folks at Wallet Hub came out with the latest report on unemployment. And boy, it is not pretty for the land of enchantment, Wally. So Wallet Hub's been tracking every few weeks. They come out with a new report. They look at where we are in our employment versus where we were at the same time last year. In that case, New Mexico is 50th. That does get us one from the bottom in terms of
DC or Puerto Rico or whoever.
Actually, Kansas.
Oh.
Kansas apparently has had a really slow recovery. And then from the start of 2020, we flipped with Kansas, and we are 51st. So we, really going above and beyond there in terms of our poor performance on unemployment. And, obviously between, whatever November 20th or whatever day this study came out and looked at. So 20th of November 2020 versus 20th of November 2019 is going to be somewhat different, but quite similar to where you are now versus the start of 2020. New Mexico and Kansas are very comparable, but right there at the bottom. So New Mexico's unemployment situation has gotten has gotten much, much worse during 2020 in the COVID situation in most other states. That is directly related to COVID-19 and the governor's lockdown policies, which I think we're going to see some significant worsening. I mean, who knows? We are a few days out. As we record this, we're recording this before Monday, but Monday is the day when theoretically the governor is going to come out and tell us where we're heading here, because that's the 2-week period. I would be willing to, and maybe I don't know, bets, but Wally and I do have prognostication. Any chance, Wally, that the governor does not extend the lockdown for at least another week or so?
Well, for places that count, meaning that have significant population, I say virtually no chance of that. Bernalillo County, Doñana County, Las Cruces, Santa Fe. I don't think there's little or no chance. Now, will Clayton become open for the 500 people or whatever live up in that part of the northeast part of the state? Maybe, but the number of people impacted, not going to be many, if any. Very
true. And one of the other things that this report includes is week over week. That's literally from the week they did the report to the previous week. And, as we get into the teeth of this lockdown situation, that's when you're going to see the real unemployment problems cropping up. That is 51st, 51 for New Mexico. So we were at the very, very bottom in terms of unemployment worsening over the prior week, according to Wallet Hub. So really tough numbers here in New Mexico. Not surprising to anybody, given the way the governor has been pushing her lockdown strategy and just really making it very difficult for a lot of businesses, even those who were open, like restaurants, to continue to do business under any conditions. And, we mentioned a couple weeks ago, it's not just restaurants, real estate, which has these bizarre restrictions placed on them, and a number of other industries, the grocery stores, et cetera, who are really have to be very frustrated by the current situation. Now,
yeah, and then just a quick thought on that, Paul, is that this pandemic will subside either by enough people getting the COVID that there's a herd immunity, hopefully helped along and quickened by vaccination. But if we look back to the 2007, 2008, how long it took New Mexico to recover back then, way slower than many, many, many other states. It's one of those, this could be the economic headwind that keeps on giving for years and possibly up to a decade or beyond. So that very, very big concern to those who live and work in New Mexico.
Yeah, and it's going to be very interesting to see. Of course, we have to hit rock bottom before the recovery starts, and we have no idea where that rock bottom is. But we also know that the unemployment insurance situation under Susana Martinez was one of the many reasons that New Mexico recovered more slowly than other states, and that situation is just beginning to be understood and known by folks in this state. We really don't know how bad it'll get because we don't know how long the situation will drag out and where we'll wind up being economically and what we'll have to come back from as a state. But lastly, in the file it under economic policies that shoot bullets into your own feet, we're great at those here in New Mexico. And this one is a Bernalillo County policy that we spoke about. We talked to Carla Kugler of the Associated Builders and Contractors couple months ago, 3 months ago maybe. And when the county was considering it, this is a policy community workforce agreement that basically requires union workers, and something like 8% of New Mexico's trades people are in unions, but it requires the unions to essentially have control over public works projects and be able to have union workers as the entire or the main workforce, and the unions have to be essentially asked for permission in order to not have all of their the workers on the project be unionized. Well, there was a article in the Albuquerque Journal by Jessica Dyer, First County CWA Yet to Be Implemented. And that means that there is a public works project that is being discussed and being built, and the CWA, the Community Workforce Agreement, has not been fully implemented on this particular project. And
why is that, Paul?
Very interesting stuff here. So, County Commissioner, it involves the West Side Visitor Center. There's a plan underway in place to build a new facility kind of on the western edge of the city of Albuquerque along Central Avenue. And it's going to cost $11.6 million. The county has the money available to build the project, including funds from the county, the city, and the state. And County Commissioner Michael Quezada, who represents the district and is a big supporter of this project, he is directly quoted as saying in the article that the new CWA requirement could introduce unknowns into the project already years in the making. He worried about costs and delays and pleaded with his commission colleagues not to require the CWA in this particular instance. He also said that the project might die if the construction bids come in above the available funding. Of course, Michael Quezada, he was in the majority on the commission who voted for the CWA 2 months ago. So there you go, 2 months, and raised new concerns about applying the new county requirements to a project to receive funding from other government sources. And basically, Michael Quezada is worried about the effects of the very legislation that he supported, which include higher labor costs on a public works project. It just is enough to make you want to bang your head against the wall.
Yeah, and and his point is that we planned on this and we know it's going to make it more expensive. He wouldn't have done this hypothetically. He knows it's going to make it more expensive. So every future project will be more expensive than it would have been otherwise, evidently. And I guess he's fine with that, but not for his pet project on the west side. So consistency is it's overrated, Paul.
I know. Well, I would settle for just some understanding of basic economics applied to projects that will be paid for by the city of Albuquerque, or in this case, Bernalillo County taxpayers, and some concern for us. Of course, it would help if voters did not vote for people who have these very misguided and short-sighted opinions on economic policies. They just wind up passing these things and adopting them because the unions get out and support their interests and their election bids. Unfortunately, that is really the reality, is that they are doing it for their own election opportunities, not because it's best for the city, the county, or whoever else. But
yeah, and this is on top of the so-called Little Davis-Bacon, which New Mexico already operates under. That I've seen estimates in terms of what a school costs in New Mexico, being anywhere from 5 to 25% higher than in surrounding states that don't have this. And then the CWA, as I understand it, it's just another level of cost that gets added on, and taxpayers pay for it. And so the bottom line is things that would have cost $10 million will cost more, 11, 12, $13 million. And it's all right. It's just taxes. Don't worry about it.
well, I guess the silver lining here is that this CWA legislation will not apply to this particular project. And even though the reasoning is totally hypocritical and self-serving, any instance where the CWA, and these are project labor agreements is the term that's used nationally. Here in New Mexico, we always have to New Mexify things. CWA, community workforce agreements, they're the same thing. They basically give the unions control over hiring and firing, or hiring of public employees for public works projects. So at least it was not applied to this particular project, and that is a good thing. So we'll take that, I guess, where we can get it, even if it's based on incredibly bad logic that involved passing it in the first place. And we'll leave it there, Wally. Thanks for listening to this week's show. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter, and tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.